Every year, Americans spend more than $2 billion on lawn chemicals. Herbicides, selective weed killers, pre-emergent treatments spread across perfectly trimmed grass like a slow-moving eraser. $2 billion. And every year at the same time, the global antibiotic resistance crisis deepens. More than 1.2 million people die annually from infections that no available drug can touch. These two facts live side by side. They are rarely examined together. They should be. Because the plants we have spent decades systematically eliminating from our yards, the ones we spray, pull, smother, and curse, are among the most chemically sophisticated antimicrobial organisms ever to grow from soil, not in theory. In documented peer-reviewed research, the compounds inside their leaves, roots, and stems can suppress bacterial strains that have rendered our most powerful pharmaceuticals irrelevant. They have been doing this quietly and persistently for thousands of years. Today we are going to walk through 15 of these plants. 15 weeds most of you have growing within 20 feet of your front door right now. Pay close attention to number 2 on this list. In 2018, researchers at the University of Thrace demonstrated that one compound extracted from a common lawn weed showed efficacy against methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, RSA, in laboratory conditions comparable to vancomycin, one of the antibiotics of last resort. The plant that produced that result grows in every meadow and roadside in the temperate world. Almost everyone watching this video has pulled it. Let's begin. Number 15. Goldenrod. The plant wrongly blamed for hay fever for 50 years, while its actual pharmacological story remained almost entirely untold. Solidago species bloom in brilliant gold across fields and roadsides in late summer. For decades, they have been blamed for the hay fever that strikes millions of people at exactly the time goldenrod flowers. The accusation is botanically false. The pollen responsible for late summer allergies comes from ragweed, which blooms at the same time but produces lightweight airborne pollen. Goldenrod's pollen is too heavy to be airborne. The plant has been unfairly prosecuted, and as a consequence, almost entirely ignored as a medicinal plant in modern Western health culture. The actual pharmacology of goldenrod includes quercetin and camphorol, two flavonoids whose antimicrobial mechanisms have been studied with increasing interest precisely because of how they work. Quercetin has demonstrated the ability to disrupt bacterial biofilm formation, the protective matrices that bacteria construct to resist antibiotic penetration. A bacterium inside a well-organized biofilm can withstand antibiotic concentrations hundreds of times higher than the same bacterium in isolation. Anything that disrupts biofilm formation is not a minor finding in the context of antibiotic resistance. German Commission E has included goldenrod in official botanical medicine monographs. Traditional use across European, Native American, and Asian medicine targeted the same applications: urinary tract infections, wound healing, respiratory infections. 3 traditions, same plant, same applications, no contact between them. That convergence is never coincidence. Number 14 is the flower that makes one of the world's most beloved beverages, and that contains a compound whose mechanism against influenza virus is identical to that of a pharmaceutical antiviral costing over $100 per course. Number 14, elderflower, and the compound inside it that inhibits neuraminidase by the same mechanism as Tamiflu. Sambucus nigra flowers in late spring with large cream-white clusters of tiny flowers that most people know as the source of elderflower cordial, one of the most popular botanical beverages in Britain and Europe. What most people making that cordial have never known is what those flowers contain. European research has documented that elderflower extracts inhibit neuraminidase, the enzyme that influenza viruses use to break free from infected cells and spread to new ones. Block neuraminidase and you contain the infection. That is the same mechanism by which oseltamivir, sold as Tamiflu, works. The elderflower was doing this before the pharmaceutical existed. It was doing it when the 1918 influenza pandemic killed 50 million people, when communities with knowledge of elderflower used it as a first response and when those without it had nothing. The flowers also contain quercetin and rutin, with documented anti-inflammatory activity against the cytokine overreaction that is responsible for the most severe influenza outcomes. The flower window is brief, a few weeks in late spring. They must be harvested in full bloom before they begin to brown. Steep the fresh flower clusters in water just off the boil for 7 minutes, covered, to retain the volatile compounds. The resulting infusion is delicate, floral, and unmistakable. The preparation detail most people miss. The neuraminidase-inhibiting compounds are heat-sensitive. Keep the water below 90 degrees Celsius and steep covered. Boiling destroys them. Number 13 carries a story that begins with a Nobel Prize in 2015, and with a weed that most gardeners in the temperate world remove without a second thought. Number 13. Mugwort, the plant whose molecular family produced the most significant anti-malarial breakthrough of the 20th century. Artemisia vulgaris is the mugwort that grows as an invasive weed in roadsides and disturbed ground across North America and Europe. It belongs to the Artemisia genus. In 2015, Chinese scientist Tu Yu received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for her discovery of artemisinin, an antimicrobial compound isolated from Artemisia annua, a close botanical relative, that became the basis for the only effective treatment for drug-resistant malaria worldwide. The compound that won the Nobel Prize came from a plant in the same genus as the weed growing in the disturbed soil at the edge of your garden. Artemisinin works by a mechanism entirely unlike conventional antibiotics. It releases free radicals inside parasitic and bacterial cells specifically, leaving human cells unharmed because the activation mechanism requires conditions present in the pathogen cells but not the hosts. That selectivity is the holy grail of antimicrobial chemistry. Mugwort itself contains lower concentrations of artemisinin-related compounds than its medicinal relative, alongside volatile oils with documented antibacterial and antifungal activity against Candida and common respiratory pathogens. Traditional Chinese medicine has used Artemisia vulgaris continuously for over 2,000 years. Traditional European herbalism used it as a digestive and antimicrobial herb under the name Mother of Herbs. They did not know about artemisinin. They knew what the plant did when people used it. The Nobel Prize eventually explained the mechanism behind the observation. Number 12 is the sticky plant that clings to your jacket when you walk through any hedgerow. The monks of the 12th century called it cleavework, and they grew it specifically for what it did to swollen lymph nodes and glandular infections that refused to resolve. Number 12. Cleavers, and the convergence of three unconnected healing traditions pointing at the same lymphatic applications. Galium aparine, the sticky weed that coats you in tiny hooks, was used in monastic herb gardens of the 12th century specifically for swollen lymph nodes, glands that refused to drain, the silent internal accumulations that preceded visible infection. What the Benedictine monks observed and what researchers are now examining is that cleavers contain iridoid glycosides and tannins, alongside a specific anthraquinone called asperuloside. Laboratory studies suggest asperuloside demonstrates activity against several gram-positive bacterial strains, including those responsible for skin and soft tissue infections. Traditional Chinese medicine independently identified cleavers as a lymphatic herb. Ayurvedic practitioners in India use the same plant under the name manjishta for similar purposes: swelling, infection, glandular stagnation, three traditions with no contact. Same plant, same application. That convergence is the signal that modern research is only beginning to decode. To prepare, gather young stems in early spring before the hooks harden. Press a handful through a juicer or cold steep in refrigerated water for 8 hours. Do not heat it. Heat degrades the asperuloside. The taste is mild, almost neutral, with a faint green vegetable quality. Drink a small glass in the morning on an empty stomach. The research into the specific mechanism is still developing, but three independent medical traditions, separated by continents and centuries, arriving at the same plant for the same problem is not a coincidence that chemistry has yet to fully explain. Number 11 was brought to Northern Europe by the Romans intentionally. They planted it at every garrison settlement from Britain to Germany. When the empire fell, the plant stayed behind and never stopped spreading. Number 11. Ground elder, the plant the Romans considered essential enough to carry across a continent, and that every gardener since has spent centuries trying to eradicate. Agopodium podagraria was planted deliberately alongside Roman garrison settlements as food and medicine. The reason was falcarinol, a polyacetylene compound concentrated in the stems and leaves that research indicates has antibacterial activity, working partially by disrupting bacterial membrane synthesis. What makes ground elder unusual is that falcarinol appears to attack through a mechanism distinct from most common antibiotics. In a world where bacteria are developing workarounds for traditional antibiotic targets with frightening efficiency, any compound that attacks through a less traveled pathway represents a meaningful finding. Scandinavian botanical research institutions have found results consistent enough to sustain continued investigation. Use only the youngest shoots, gathered before the plant flowers. After flowering, the falcarinol concentration shifts, and the leaves become noticeably bitter and less useful medicinally. Eat the young leaves as a pot herb, boiled briefly with butter, as the Romans did. The taste is of fresh carrot tops with a faint anise quality, mild and slightly sweet when young. The Romans were pragmatic. Carry your medicine with you. Grow it at every outpost. It survives everything. Before we continue, everything we are covering today goes considerably deeper in 3 guides I put together. A step-by-step guide to growing and using the most powerful medicinal plants at home, 30 tea and preparation protocols with exact temperature and dosage, and a complete home apothecary system covering tinctures, salves, and extraction methods that preserve the active compounds correctly. The preparation details that most sources omit. The link is in the first pinned comment if you want to explore further. Now let's keep going. Number 10. Self-heal, the plant named with unusual directness. Prunella vulgaris, the plant that heals itself, and by extension, you. It grows low, purple-flowered, and unremarkable looking in lawns and disturbed soil. Medieval surgeons called it carpenter's herb because it was the first thing applied to tool wounds on woodworking sites. The Iroquois used it for infected throat ulcers. Traditional Chinese medicine used it under the name xia ku chao, specifically for bacterial infections of the glands and throat. The active compound most people know is rosmarinic acid, the same compound in rosemary and lemon balm, with documented antimicrobial activity particularly against oral and respiratory pathogens. But what makes Prunella vulgaris genuinely unusual is a polysaccharide it produces called prunellin. Studies suggest prunellin may interfere with the ability of certain bacteria to adhere to mucosal tissue, addressing one of the earliest steps of infection before it can establish itself. An antimicrobial that works at the attachment stage rather than after colonization is addressing a different problem entirely. Prepare as a simple infusion. 1 teaspoon of fresh leaves and flowers in a cup of water just off the boil. Steeped 7 minutes covered, strained. Slightly bitter, mildly herbal, softened considerably with raw honey. Drink at the first sign of a scratchy throat. The mechanism that makes it work is the one that traditional medicine across several independent cultures identified through observation alone. The research is now catching up to the observation. Number 9 spreads across your lawn and garden beds in summer like a quiet invasion. 5 continents have been eating it for 3,000 years. The United States is among the very few cultures that classified it as a weed and started spraying it. Number 9, purslane, the biofilm destroyer that the whole world eats except us. Portulaca oleracea. Greeks eat it in fattoush. Turks cook it with yogurt. Mexicans call it verdolagas and braise it with chili. In the Middle East, it has been eaten continuously since before recorded agricultural history. What all those traditions knew without the language of biochemistry is that purslane contains marine-type omega-3 fatty acids at concentrations unusual for a land plant. But what makes it relevant to this list is a separate mechanism entirely. The mucilaginous polysaccharides in purslane stems and leaves, that characteristic slipperiness when you chew it raw, appear to disrupt bacterial biofilms. Those are the protective matrices that bacteria construct to resist antibiotic penetration. Purslane's polysaccharides appear to interfere with the quorum-sensing signals bacteria use to build and maintain those biofilm structures. Research in this area is still in early stages, but if the mechanism holds under larger investigation, it would represent a meaningful addition to the antimicrobial toolkit, precisely because it targets bacterial communication rather than bacterial metabolism. Eat it raw in salads, mild, slightly salty, with the satisfying crunch of young cucumber. Do not cook it for more than 2 or 3 minutes. You lose both the omega-3 content and the polysaccharide structures that carry the biofilm disrupting activity. Number 8 is the winter plant. Every other medicine on this list sleeps when the ground freezes. Number 8 does not. Number 8. Chickweed. The winter healer that germinates in autumn as most plants are dying, continues growing under light snow, and carries antimicrobial compounds active against Candida fungi and gram-negative bacteria associated with urinary tract infections. Stellaria media solves the oldest problem in medicinal plant use. Most infections do not wait for the growing season. Chickweed germinates as temperatures drop, produces its small star-shaped white flowers through late autumn and early winter, and is often the only green living thing visible in a garden in February. The active agents are primarily saponins and a flavonoid called rutin. Rutin has been studied for both anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. The saponin content gives chickweed the soapy quality when rubbed between the fingers. Historically, the people of the Appalachian Mountains called a chickweed preparation poor man's medicine. Fresh plant crushed and mixed with rendered lard, applied to abscesses, boils, and infected wounds. The lard acted as a carrier, holding the active compounds against the skin for extended contact time. The preparation detail most sources omit. Chickweed saponins are water-soluble but heat-sensitive. For topical use, warm the plant material in oil at no more than 40 degrees Celsius for 6 to 8 hours. A cold, infused oil. For internal use, a cold water infusion overnight captures the saponins more effectively than hot tea. Harvest before the flowers fade. After pollination, the stems toughen and the saponin profile shifts. That harvest window is sometimes only 2 or 3 weeks. The observation that it remains available when all other medicines are frozen in the ground is itself worth consideration. Number 7. The bandage of God. That is what medieval healers called it. And that was not poetry, it was instruction. Number 7. Broadleaf plantain. Aucubin converting to aucubiginin on cell wall contact with documented inhibitory activity against MRSA, and allantoin used in commercial wound creams today, growing through the cracks of your driveway. Plantigo major appears in the Leech Book of Bald, one of the oldest surviving medical texts in the English language, dated to the 9th century, prescribed for infected wounds, snake bites, and festering ulcers. The Cherokee, the Mohican, and the Iroquois traditions, with no contact with each other, all identified it independently as a wound healer. The mechanism is aucubin, an iridoid glycoside with documented broad-spectrum antibacterial activity. When fresh leaf tissue is crushed and cell walls break, enzymatic conversion begins. Aucubin transforms into aucubiginin, a compound with a direct inhibitory effect on Staphylococcus aureus, including methicillin-resistant strains. The Cherokee did not have a laboratory to know this. They had thousands of years of careful observation. Research is now beginning to understand exactly why their observations were accurate. A secondary compound, allantoin, stimulates cell proliferation and wound healing. It is used in commercial wound creams today. It is also free, abundant, and growing through the cracks of your driveway. Crush fresh leaves and apply directly to minor cuts, insect stings, or irritated skin. For internal use, cold steep a handful of fresh leaves in water overnight. The taste is mild, slightly vegetable green, unremarkable. The healing is not unremarkable. Number 6. The most despised plant in North American lawn culture. A weed so hated that the global market for products designed specifically to kill it exceeds $500 million annually. Number 6. Dandelion, which Hippocrates prescribed, which Persian physicians in the 10th century called tarashaquan, which the Chinese included in official imperial pharmacopoeias for over 1,000 years, and which modern science has found contains compounds with inhibitory activity against gram-positive bacteria associated with internal abscesses. Taraxacum officinale. We spend $500 million per year killing a plant that appears in the medical literature of ancient Greece, Persia, China, and medieval Europe simultaneously. The bitter compounds taraxacin and taraxarin stimulate bile production and liver activity, addressing conditions of stagnation that ancient healers recognized as precursors to systemic illness. Modern research has found that taraxinic acid demonstrates inhibitory activity against gram-positive bacteria. The root contains inulin, the prebiotic fiber that feeds the specific bacterial populations in the gut responsible for producing short-chain fatty acids. The compound's gut researchers now consider central to intestinal immunity. An antimicrobial plant that simultaneously strengthens the immune environment of the gut is addressing infection at 2 levels simultaneously. Simmer 1 tablespoon of chopped dandelion root in 2 cups of water for 20 minutes. Not a vigorous boil, a steady simmer to preserve the volatile compounds. The resulting decoction is dark, bitter, and deeply earthy. The French have consumed roasted dandelion root as café de pissenlit for centuries, recognizing intuitively that this bitter, stubborn plant had something the body needed. During the Second World War, nurses across occupied European hospitals used it as a bridge, not as a replacement for penicillin, they were clear about that, but as something with genuine antimicrobial activity when nothing else was available. The research into its mechanisms continues to expand. Its traditional reputation is several thousand years old. Number 5. The blood infection warrior, the plant covered in armor. Let us address the obvious thing first. Yes, it stings. Stinging nettle, UDA lectin that binds to and disrupts the cell membranes of drug-resistant gram-positive bacteria through a mechanism that leaves human cells unharmed. Urtica dioica is covered in microscopic hollow needles, silica-tipped trichomes that inject histamine and formic acid on contact. The sting is immediate, burning, and can last for hours. This is the plant's defense mechanism. It is extraordinarily effective. Here's what most people destroying it with herbicide do not know. Nettle root contains Urtica dioica agglutinin, UDA, a lectin protein with a specific and unusual mechanism. UDA binds to and disrupts the cell membranes of drug-resistant gram-positive bacteria. It works not by flooding the system with a generalized chemical attack, but by targeting specific surface proteins on bacterial cells. Research from European universities has identified this as a potentially significant mechanism, particularly in the context of MRSA, because the target is a surface feature that bacteria cannot easily modify without losing essential functions. If the target is external and structural, the standard bacterial resistance pathways do not apply. The Romans carried nettle seeds to Britain deliberately, planting it as both food and medicine. During World War I, German military wound dressings were woven from nettle fibers when cotton supplies ran short. What the soldiers could not have known is that those fibers were releasing small amounts of UDA and formic acid directly into the wound environment, a passive antiseptic embedded in the bandage itself. Heat destroys the sting entirely. 30 seconds in boiling water denatures the trichomes. The resulting greens taste like spinach with a deeper, earthier, more mineral quality. Blanch only the young tops, the first 4 to 6 leaves, before the plant flowers. Number 4. The dandelion of the ancient world. The plant that every military tradition in recorded history seems to have arrived at independently for wounds that would not close. Yarrow and the 2018 University of Thrace research demonstrating activity against MRSA in laboratory conditions comparable to vancomycin, the antibiotic of last resort. Achillea millefolium. The name carries the story. The Latin binomial comes directly from Achilles, the warrior hero of the Iliad. Homer records that Achilles used yarrow to treat the wounds of his soldiers, staunching blood flow and preventing the infections that killed as many men as enemy weapons. Classical sources confirmed it was called Herba militaris, the herb of soldiers. The Chinese included it in the Shenong Bencao Jing, the divine farmer's classic of materia medica. The Navajo used it, the Norse used it, the Ojibwe used it. Every military tradition of the ancient world arrived independently at the same plant for the same purpose. In 2018, research from the University of Thrace in Greece demonstrated that yarrow essential oil showed efficacy against methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA, in laboratory conditions with results comparable to vancomycin, one of the antibiotic treatments of last resort for MRSA infections. The mechanism involves a combination of the sesquiterpene lactone-achillin, the flavonoid apigenin, and several lesser-studied borneol derivatives that appear to work in concert. No single compound accounts for the full effect. Isolated extracts underperform compared to whole plant preparations, which is one reason why traditional use of the whole plant consistently outperforms what modern supplement companies produce from standardized extracts. What makes yarrow's mechanism genuinely unusual is a secondary effect researchers have documented alongside the antibacterial activity. Yarrow compounds appear to stimulate macrophage activation, the white blood cells responsible for identifying and destroying bacterial cells throughout the body. Yarrow does not merely kill bacteria externally. It may simultaneously prime the internal immune response to pursue infection more aggressively. Steep 2 teaspoons of dried flowers and leaves in a cup of water, just off the boil for 10 to 12 minutes, covered. The taste is complex and assertive, bitter, aromatic, with a camphor quality at the back of the palate. Drink at the onset of fever or infection. Achilles was not waiting for a clinical trial. And now, number 3, number 2, and number 1. The 3 plants I have saved for last because together they represent the deepest challenge to how we think about what we have spent decades eliminating. Starting with number 3, the plant with 2 faces. Number 3, burdock. The root whose mechanism against anaerobic bacteria explains why traditional healers across Asia and Europe used it specifically for wounds that had begun to smell, tissue that was dying, infections where nothing else was working. Arctium lapa produces those large leaves and hooked burrs, the seed heads that inspired Velcro. The root is the medicinal part. It contains chlorogenic acid and ursolic acid, a pentacyclic triterpenoid compound found in the waxy coating of apple skins and rosemary leaves, but concentrated with unusual density in burdock root. Ursolic acid has been examined in laboratory settings for its activity against anaerobic bacteria, the bacterial populations that thrive in oxygen-depleted environments, in dead tissue, in deep wounds, in conditions where conventional antibiotics, which generally require oxygen-dependent bacterial metabolism to be effective, struggle to penetrate. Traditional Asian and European herbalism used burdock root specifically for deep infections, slow-healing wounds, skin conditions that spread inward. That specificity maps precisely onto the anaerobic niche, where ursolic acid research suggests the root has its most distinctive effect. In Japan, burdock root, called gobo, is a standard culinary vegetable eaten regularly. The consistency of long-term daily consumption in Japanese populations with notably low rates of certain inflammatory conditions is the kind of epidemiological signal that traditional medicine observes over generations. The root can be harvested in autumn of its first year, scrubbed, sliced thin, and cooked in stir-fries and soups. The flavor is earthy, slightly sweet, with a satisfying crunch that holds even after cooking. Burdock proves that some of the most powerful antimicrobial plants look like weeds and taste like earth. Number 2, creeping Charlie, the plant the Anglo-Saxons called alehoof and used to preserve and clarify ale for centuries before hops existed, and whose ursolic acid concentration shows activity against anaerobic bacteria in conditions where conventional antibiotics cannot function. Glaucoma heteracea. You know this plant. You have almost certainly pulled it in frustration. It spreads by runners along the soil surface, rooting at every node, colonizing every corner of every garden. When you spray it with herbicide, it retreats, and then it comes back. It has been coming back for a very long time. The Anglo-Saxons called it alehoof. The plant used to clarify and preserve ale before hops became the universal bittering and preserving agent across Northern Europe. Every person who drank that ale was consuming, without knowing it, one of the most powerful antibacterial plant compounds in the European pharmacopoeia. The active agents are glecomine, a specific polysaccharide, and ursolic acid, concentrated with unusual density in the plant's small scalloped kidney-shaped leaves. Ursolic acid has been examined in laboratory settings specifically for its activity against anaerobic bacteria, the organisms that thrive in oxygen-depleted environments, in dead tissue, in deep wounds where conventional antibiotics struggle to reach. Anglo-Saxon healers used ground ivy specifically for necrotic wounds and ulcers that refused to close. That is not a coincidence. That is the specific niche of anaerobic infection, which is precisely where the research suggests the plant may have its most distinctive effect. Simultaneously, ursolic acid appears to stimulate the growth of new capillary tissue, healthy blood vessels growing into damaged areas to begin the repair process. The old healers describe this dual action in poetic terms: the plant that drives out poison and calls back life. The compounds in Creeping Charlie appear to do at a molecular level something that matches that description with uncomfortable precision. Gather fresh leaves in spring or early autumn. 1 tablespoon of fresh torn leaves in warm water, 70 degrees Celsius, not boiling, steeped 8 minutes covered. The flavor is unmistakable, mint and sage in the same family, but with something deeper, like the floor of an old forest after rain. Number 1. Thyme. The herb the British National Health Service officially recognizes as a treatment for acute bronchitis, whose primary compound thymol is the active ingredient in Listerine, and that has been used in embalming, hospital disinfectants, and wound dressings for over a century because it kills the things that kill people. Thymus vulgaris. Most people have it in their garden as a culinary herb. Most have never considered why thyme has been in human food for 4,000 years across every Mediterranean culture, why it was burned in temples as a purifying smoke, why Hippocrates used it for respiratory diseases, why the ancient Egyptians used it in the embalming process, and why Listerine, the most widely used antiseptic mouthwash in the world, contains thymol as its primary active compound. Thymol is not a natural curiosity that pharmaceutical companies have found interesting. It is the active compound in an antimicrobial preparation validated in clinical use for decades. The source is a plant growing in most herb gardens and as a wild perennial in disturbed ground across the Mediterranean and beyond. The mechanism is membrane disruption. Thymol integrates into bacterial cell membranes and disrupts their structural integrity. It is effective against a broad range of gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, against Candida species, against antibiotic-resistant strains. Research confirming thymol's activity against MRSA, Salmonella, Pseudomonas, H. pylori, and Candida spans multiple research institutions. The NHS includes time-based preparations in official treatment guidance for acute bronchitis. German Commission E has approved it for the same. These are not fringe endorsements from alternative medicine. They are mainstream regulatory bodies recognizing clinical efficacy. The preparation detail that matters: fresh thyme or recently dried thyme within 6 months. Volatile oils that carry thymol degrade with storage. The difference between fresh thyme steeped in near boiling water for 15 minutes and 3-year-old dried herbs is not trivial. 3 to 4 full sprigs per cup. Cover while steeping to prevent volatile oils escaping with the steam. The tea is sharp, aromatic, unmistakably itself. Drink it at the first sign of respiratory infection. The plant that has been sitting in your herb garden has been doing this work since before the concept of an antibiotic existed. Before I close, the preparation details we have covered today, the specific temperatures, the extraction methods, the harvest windows, are the difference between a plant that works and a plant that does not. Those details are in the complete practical guides in the first pinned comment below, covering growing, preparation, dosage, and the safety context for every plant we discussed. And for anyone who watched all the way through this video, use the code FULLVIDEO at checkout for 20% off. The link is in the pinned comment. It is there whenever you are ready. There is a principle that runs through every plant on this list that I want to name clearly. The compounds that make these plants effective are fragile. They have specific temperature tolerances. They degrade under prolonged heat, under the industrial processing that reduces a complex living plant to a standardized extract. Aucubin begins converting to inactive compounds within hours of plantain being heated above 85 degrees Celsius. UDA lectin and nettle root denatures above 60 degrees, which is why traditional nettle preparations were cold processed or taken as tinctures, never boiled. Ursolic acid is fat soluble, meaning a water infusion alone captures only a fraction of what is available. The Anglo-Saxons brewed creeping Charlie and alcohol and fat-based preparations for exactly this reason, though they had no chemistry to explain why. How many times over the past century have researchers tested a traditional remedy, found it ineffective, and declared it folklore, not knowing they used an extraction method that destroyed the compound they were looking for? The plants are still here. They survived everything we threw at them. The knowledge of how to work with them is more fragile than the plants themselves. Share this with someone who still spends Saturday mornings at war with their lawn. They deserve to know what they are killing. Tell me in the comments, which of these 15 plants is growing in your yard right now? Subscribe and ring the bell. I will see you in the next one.